Okay, Alan, I'm ready. Thanks. All right, open your Bibles, please, with me to Paul's first letter to the church at Corinth. We're at chapter 8. If you've been away on vacation, I'll bring you up to date quickly as we can here. Paul spent about 18 months or so in Corinth. He was already well into his ministry by the time he got to Corinth. You know that he had been a persecutor of the early church. He believed with all of his heart that Jesus was a fake, that the Jewish Messiah could not meet such a miserable death. Even though he had not known Jesus personally, he said that again and again later in his life, that he never got to meet Jesus. He certainly knew about him and was convinced that he was some kind of imposter, that the Jewish Messiah couldn't be killed. So he was an avid persecutor of the Jews who had decided he was their long-awaited Messiah, stood by holding the coats of others as they rained down rocks on young Stephen, stoning him to death, the first Christian martyr, as you recall, in the Jerusalem area. He was so enthusiastic about his persecution of Jews who were claiming that Jesus was the long-awaited Messiah that he asked permission from the temple in Jerusalem to go up to the capital of Syria. It still is the capital of Syria today, Damascus, to root out other Jews who were saying Jesus was the long-awaited Messiah. On the way, had this dramatic, life-changing experience, was struck to the ground, blinding light. He could not see for several days. And he heard a voice saying, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Who are you?" "I am the Lord." Okay, his life was forever changed. Now, the big thing that helped Paul later in his life was the fact that he was born at Tarsus. So, if you go north from modern-day Israel, the Dead Sea, the Jordan, the Sea of Galilee, Jerusalem, if you continue north through Lebanon, this is modern-day Turkey. It's called Asia Minor because it's so much smaller than China and India farther over. But Europe, you remember, starts with the Straits of Bosphorus here and goes westward. This is Asia and this is modern-day Turkey. Tarsus was a Roman city. A Roman city at the time Paul was born, and so by birth he was a Roman citizen. And that helped him when he later appealed that he wanted his case to be heard in Rome. But not yet. So he traveled through this whole area, visiting place after place. Eventually had a vision in the night telling him, "Come over to Macedon and help us." This part of northernmost Greece was called Macedonia, and the ruler there 400 years before had been a fellow named Philip of Macedon who would father a young man named Alexander the Great. All right, so a city named for him, Philippi, right on the famous road the Romans had now built that went all the way to Rome, the Via Ignatia. He crossed over the Straits of Bosphorus, taught, preached in Philippi, then Thessalonica, Berea, and when he was persecuted in place after place, went south to Athens, had a miserable experience there, debating with them in Aristotelian logic, crossed over to Corinth and had a much better time there. But after some 18 months or so, moved over and came back to Asia Minor at Ephesus, a major Roman city by this time, a Roman city. The Romans had made the main street the cardia of their city, the heart. Had brought in Roman marble and lined the streets. Had built a magnificent library that's been reconstructed from the ruins now. When you go see the ruins at Ephesus, you can see it. Not far off the coast, a little island of Patmos where Revelation was written. We believe he was here, a period of 2 years roughly, that he started getting this communication from Corinth, that they were fussing and arguing. He says, "Chloe's people," whoever they were, we don't know, "Chloe's people have reported to me." And so in this letter, he's answering one thing after another that the people in Corinth are arguing about. Okay, so this letter is quite different from the letter to the Romans. He had not yet been to Rome when he wrote the letter to the Romans, so he's not writing to individuals with individual problems. He's laying out the Christian faith as he understood it. It's sort of his credo, his I believe. But here he's dealing with specific problems. And today we're going to deal with the problem about the meat offered to idols. That's the big thing. The meat offered to idols. We'll get to that after we pray. God, we open your book because we need to learn from it things that are forever true about you and about us. We're grateful that you found people who were closely attuned enough to you that they could convey these things that are forever true about you. We, United Methodist at Boston Avenue, do not believe this book of yours was floated down by some miraculous event, but written by real people, limited by their own times and places, and yet somehow attuned enough that they could hear some things about you that are forever true. Those are the things we're looking for. We offer our best effort in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, I know I've told you these things before, but let me say them again. Animals offered as sacrifice were not usually destroyed. Meat, protein were too valuable to destroy. Instead, when animals were offered, not only in paganism, but in Judaism, most often just the offal from the inside. The insides were taken out and burned, and the aroma went up to the heavens. The meat itself was sold in marketplaces. The people Paul's now meeting are predominantly Gentile, which simply means non-Jews. They were non-Jews. They were polytheists, meaning they had multiple gods. So to Jews, they were heathen. They were pagans. Now, I've told you how the system of sacrifice came into being, and it was not a Jewish thing. It was an every person thing, an every community thing. As we learned about the Western Hemisphere, we discovered that people over here had been doing the same things that people in the Eastern Hemisphere had been doing. And that is, they were being affected by forces much bigger than they were. They had various names for these forces that were bigger than they were, and they had various ways they tried to appease these gods. Okay. They decided maybe this god or multiple gods demanded more from them. And so if they believed these gods were sending rain for their crops and warmth from the sun, then almost every culture decided we should bring the first thing produced and harvested to our place of worship. This was true of Jews, but it was true of non-Jews as well. So the Hebrew scriptures say if you're growing wheat, you bring the first bushel to the temple. If you grow grapes, you bring the first bottle of wine to the temple. If you grow olives, you bring the first squeezing of oil to the temple. You offer up the first fruits of your labor. The first fruits of your labor. If you're a shepherd, you don't bring the sickly, crippled animal you have. You bring the best. You bring the little lamb you love best of all. That one without blemish, without spot. And maybe you can appease the gods. Look at what's happening to our farmers and ranchers right now. I mean, this morning while I was shaving early, I had the little television in the bathroom going. I can see it in the mirror while I'm shaving. And they're talking about the drought in the Midwest. And we know something of that here in Oklahoma. And they were showing these corn farmers, shucking down these little nubs that they have. If they don't have a rain soon, within a few days, they're going to lose thousands of acres of corn. So, I asked God to send us rain. I asked God, could you move this big high-pressure center off of us and let us be a little cooler here in Oklahoma? I'm blessed to work in an air-conditioned building. I'm blessed to sleep in an air-conditioned home. But I know there are many who are not. There are people sleeping under this bridge right down here 200 yards from our church. Not everybody has an air conditioner. All these construction workers, these orange barrels that drive us nuts, they're working in 102 degrees. I remember what it was like to bale hay and haul hay. I remember what it was like to drive a truck one summer and deliver freight. I was 17. I'd gotten a commercial license. My uncle said he'd hire me if I got a commercial license. I was driving a truck for him by myself. And every morning early, I was loading this truck from a big warehouse and delivering all day long. I was wrestling washing machines and stoves and refrigerators, caskets we delivered to the funeral homes, caskets in big boxes. With a dolly, I'm moving all this freight. I know what hot weather is. I know what it's like to work in it. And I still feel for those who do it. I grew up in the oil field where the natural gas is really what it was in my home county. But I used to go down to the rigs where my dad was working. I've seen those roughnecks come out of those derricks with mosquitoes as big as your thumb on the back of their neck, sweat-soaked. I've seen them in the wintertime come out of that derrick with icicles hanging off the edges of their hard hats. I know what that's like. I've been there. I grew up there. And I worry. I am concerned about people who don't have an air conditioner in this horrible weather or who have to work out in this weather. I ask God, get that big high-pressure area off of us and let us have some relief. Let us have some rain here. But if you thought you could somehow influence this God, then I think you'd do most anything. And that's what the ancients did. And if they brought the first bushel of wheat, they brought the first squeezing of olive oil, they brought the first bottle of wine, they brought the finest little lamb they had, and still it didn't rain, then they tried something more desperate. And around the planet, various groups began to offer up human sacrifice. Humans, their children. Pick out a daughter, pick out a son. Other smarter ones decided, no, somebody else's son, somebody else's daughter will offer. And when the conquistadors came to Mexico, they made great sacrifices as far as the Aztecs were concerned. Catch a Spaniard and cut out his heart while he was still breathing. Cut out his heart and offer it to the gods. Okay? That's how the sacrificial system developed all over the planet. All right, Paul is in pagan, heathen territory. There are some Jews in each of these communities who worship the one true God. But Paul feels now he's been called to be the messenger that Jesus was the long-awaited Messiah of God. That God so loved the world, He sent His Son Jesus. So He's operating in pagan, heathen territory almost all the time. And these folks go to the market, and the only meat that's for sale there has been offered down at the local temple. A temple of pagan, heathen gods. Is it okay for them to buy that meat and eat it or not? That's the question. Okay? In Corinth, they're quarreling about that. We can't eat that meat that's been offered to pagans. But if we don't, we have no meat, you see. That's the problem. Let's look at chapter 8. Now, concerning food sacrificed to idols, we know that all of us possess knowledge. That is, we know that our relationship with God really isn't dependent upon what we eat. I mean, you and I have been through the book of Acts just a couple of months ago. And in the book of Acts, Simon Peter had this vision at Joppa, remember? A vision. When he lay down one afternoon to take a nap, he saw this great sheet coming down out of heaven with all kinds of animals, maybe even pigs, and all kinds of birds, maybe even an old black crow. And a voice saying, "Peter, get up and kill and eat." "Oh, not I. I don't eat that kind of stuff." And a voice said, "What I call clean, don't you call unclean." Remember? Yeah. And then he, about that time, heard a knock at the door, and there were men here from the Roman centurion Cornelius saying, "Our commanding officer said he had a vision that we were to come to Joppa and find you and bring you back, that you have something to say to Cornelius." And what Peter went to say to Cornelius is, "You're a Gentile, you're a Roman, you're uncircumcised, but God's calling you clean. How can I call you unclean?" Okay? So, here we are again now. Paul is saying, we have knowledge. These Greeks, over here, he's writing to Greeks, they now are nearly 400 years after Plato, Socrates, Aristotle. They think they're very smart. And these Christians that have come into the faith during his roughly 18 months here have a certain amount of knowledge. So that's what he's talking about. But look where he goes with that. But knowledge puffs up. You get to feeling pretty proud of yourself because you're smart. But love builds up. So the people in Corinth are having another one of these debates. And he's saying, instead of playing these games with your brain, why don't you let your heart work every once in a while? Okay. Anyone who claims to know something does not yet have the necessary knowledge. But anyone who loves God is known by Him. So again, you have all kinds of knowledge of where this meat was offered and who's now selling it. But are you really being motivated more by love and compassion? Therefore, hence, as to the eating of food offered to idols, we know that no idol in the world really exists. Now, what he means by that, of course, is he knows these people have these little gods and goddesses in their bedrooms and in their little private rooms, and some of them wear them around their necks and on bracelets and so on. He knows that. But what he's saying is they aren't real. No matter what kind of power folks think they have, they don't. They're worthless. Whether you make them out of gold or silver or carve fancy woods or other stones, they really aren't real. We know that, he said. He's writing to these people in the church at Corinth. We know that. They don't really exist. And that there is no God but one. Now remember, Paul is a good Jew. He doesn't say used to be. When he writes, he says, I am a Pharisee of a Pharisee. I am a Jew. And so, for a Jew, every morning and every night, all his life he has said, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. You must have no other God but Him. You must love Him with all your heart and mind and soul and strength. Twice a day. Every day. So, he can say, I know all these things they worship, all these things they bow down to, all these things to whom they offer sacrifice, aren't real. So these are games these folks are playing. They're not real. There's only one God. Indeed, even though there may be so-called gods in heaven and on earth, I mean, people do call them gods, in fact, there are many gods and many lords to whom people ascribe some worth. Remember, the word worship comes from worth-ship, anything to which we ascribe worth. Okay. In fact, there are many. People call them by those names. Yet, for us, there is one Elohim, the Father from whom are all things and for whom we exist, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom are all things and through whom we exist. So look how he's coming at this. May we eat food that's been offered to pagan gods? Can we go to the marketplace and buy? It is not everyone, however, who has this knowledge. Now follow his line of thought here. I'll get to it. Since some have become so accustomed to idols until now, they still think of the food they eat as food offered to an idol. That is, their whole lives they've been taught that these gods are real. They've seen their grandparents bow down to them, their parents bow down to them. They've observed holy days, and that simply means set apart, days set apart for honoring these gods and goddesses. So it's hard for some to separate that. They know this meat went down to that temple down the street where these pagan rituals are being conducted. And these people, their conscience, being weak, is defiled by the thought that they might be eating food offered to God, these idols. He goes on, food will not bring us close to God, but we're no worse off if we do not eat, and no better off if we do. I mean, our relationship to God isn't really founded on whether we eat or whether we don't eat. God doesn't love you more if you don't eat the meat sold in those markets, and He doesn't love you more if you do eat. God just loves you as much as He loves you, whether you're eating or not. That's His argument. But take care that this liberty of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. For if others see you, who possess knowledge, eating in the temple of an idol, might they not, since their conscience is weak, be encouraged to the point of eating food sacrificed to idols, which in their minds is a sin? So by your knowledge, those weak believers for whom Christ died are destroyed. Their faith goes by the way when they see you in these places and think you are not a person of faith in the one true God. But when you thus sin against members of your family, he means the Christian family, and wound their conscience when it is weak, you sin against Christ because, you see, you don't want to do anything that would cause anybody else to wander from the ways of Christ. Therefore, if food is a cause of their falling, not yours, you know. There's no magic in this food just because somebody thought it was being offered to a God who really doesn't exist. Therefore, if food is a cause of their falling, I will never eat meat so that I may not cause one of them to fall. That's a decision Paul has made. He's putting this back into the laps of those in Corinth. You decide. You decide. If in fact it's the only meat around, there's not a good kosher butcher whom I can afford, I just won't eat meat. Because I don't want somebody else to see me doing that and it weaken their faith or conscience. For them, it's still an issue. For me, Paul is saying it's not an issue. I know God doesn't love me more if I eat or doesn't love me more if I don't eat. But if they think I'm not as effective a witness as I was before, I'm not eating. I'm not eating that meat that's been offered to idols. Okay. And so some have written about a stumbling block. If anything you do causes somebody else to think less of you or more of you. Somebody said to me when they opened the big new casino out on Riverside, I go past there twice a day to work and back. You know. Somebody said to me, boy, they have a terrific buffet, and it's cheap because they want you to come in and gamble. You should try it. They have a terrific steak in there. Do you think I'm going in that casino? No way. I could go and eat and not stick a nickel in a machine. But somebody might see me and think I'm condoning gambling. And I'm not. Okay? So, I preached at annual conference this year, twice. Bishop Hayes gave me that privilege, and so on Sunday night I preached at the memorial service where we honored clergy and clergy spouses of Oklahoma who've died during the past year. Methodist, of course, Methodist clergy and spouses. And then Monday night we were commissioning those who've now completed all of their classroom work, 4 years of undergraduate work, 3 years minimum of graduate school. They have that master's degree now of divinity. And they're about to be commissioned. When I came along, we were told, now you're on trial. On trial means we're going to watch you like a hawk. We're going to watch you like a hawk. We're not finally ordaining you until we've had time to observe you. Some of these folks go off to seminaries across the country, and a bishop, district superintendent, may not have seen this person, except once a year at annual conference. All the time they've been off at college, maybe graduate school as well. Now you're back in Oklahoma. You have to serve in Oklahoma, where district superintendents, a local pastor-parish relations committee, the bishop, all will decide. You also have all these members of the board of ordained ministry, and all of us are watching you. We're watching you, and trying to decide, are you an example that we want to finally say to the bishop, ordain this woman, ordain this man. He or she is ready to do that. There's some clergy who think they shouldn't be held to any higher standard than anybody else. They want to be seen as one of you. They dress, however they think you dress every day. We have more preachers being, more and more casual in the way they dress. I see them in the hospitals making their calls. I tell Gail, it's amazing. More than at any other time in my life, I make our hospital calls every Wednesday, as you know. Every sick person that we know about, every Wednesday, I visit. And rarely does a Wednesday go by that somebody I don't even know on an elevator says to me, wow, you look so nice. You know why? Because very few dress like I do anymore. Not many. They wear dockers, and loafers, and knit shirts because they want to be like you. And that's what they think you are. And that's what you like to wear, so that's what they're wearing. Okay. But I came along at a time, a long time ago, when I was told, no, there's supposed to be a different standard. When I was 18 and pastoring 2 little country churches, I didn't go knock on a doorbell without at least a shirt and tie. It was so hot, we didn't have air conditioning. I didn't always wear a coat to make calls, at people's houses, but I always had on a shirt and tie. I never went with an open collar, never. I felt it was important, even to that little church, that one day I was not a minister and the next day I was, and I felt that had something to do with the way I should conduct myself in all situations. So we all have to decide things that we might do that would be a stumbling block to others, that they would see us in a certain place and imagine something that may not be true at all. May not be true at all. That if I went to eat the buffet at the casino and just went to eat and then walked out, somebody might assume I'd gambled when I wouldn't. So I'm not going. If I have to pay more somewhere else, I'll pay more somewhere else. I'm not going to the casino. You'll have to decide for yourself. Okay, chapter 9. Enough of that. Let's move on to chapter 9. Let's skip way down to verse 16. We're not doing all the verses and chapters this time. If I proclaim the gospel, here the word gospel is really important over and over. It's the word euangelion in Greek. We get from it the word evangelism in English. It literally means the good news. Okay. And I told you that 3 weeks ago, I guess now, maybe 3 weeks ago, when I was going to Oklahoma City on a Saturday morning to talk about these people for whom we're going to be voting this week for bishop. By the way, it's this week. We have to elect 3 new bishops for our jurisdiction. I'll be in Oklahoma City Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday for that election and the consecration of these new bishops. So anyway, on the way over, I turned on the radio. It was early on Saturday morning, and it just came on to the news I'd been listening to late the afternoon before on the way home, and it was a story about home repairs. If your commode won't flush, or this won't happen, or it flushes when it's not supposed to, and you're not touching it, what does that mean? It was passing the time till I got to the meeting. And on the way back, I got in my car, and when I cranked it, it came on, and it was an Oklahoma City preacher. And at first I started immediately to turn it, and then I thought, no, I want to hear what this guy has to say. And I told you he had in front of him the Communist Manifesto. And he was going point by point and trying to say that every one of the things in the Communist Manifesto is happening in the United States right now. That we've been taken over. It was, that Lenin thought you should have one economic system for all of the communist government. But of course, communism took that in one direction. This fellow said that's the Federal Reserve System. And our Federal Reserve System, it's communist. It's absolutely communist and so on. I listened to him as I drove back to Tulsa. I never heard the gospel. Not a word of it. I can only imagine an 8-year-old child sitting there and listening to that garbage and walking out just almost trembling. This is my country. My country is communist. All these people that I hear mentioned in the news are communists and so on. It was horrible. I don't know who would pay this guy to be their pastor. I don't understand. But I know there are people who do, right here in Tulsa too. Right here in Tulsa. Well, the Scriptures, as far as I read them, says this is all supposed to be about good news. And that's where Paul starts right here with this sentence. If I proclaim good news, this gives me no ground for boasting, for an obligation is laid on me. And woe to me if I do not proclaim the good news. When our boys were growing up, sometimes people would ask me, your boys going to be preachers? I say, I don't know. I don't call preachers. We've seen to it that our boys were in church from the time they were born. As soon as Gail was physically able to come to church herself, the boys were brought to church. They grew up in the nurseries at First Methodist Houston. Our little boys, when first things they learned to say was Ms. Moore, Ms. Moore. Sweetest lady in the nursery at First Methodist Church. They loved Ms. Moore. They grew up in the church. Neither one of them ended up being a minister. And there's some preachers that sort of heavy-handedly put on their kids to be what they are. Not for me. And one of my boys said to me one time, when he saw me, agonizing over a sermon, he said, I can't believe you would choose a job where you have to write a term paper every week and get up and give it to the class on Sunday morning. And I said, I didn't choose it. I didn't choose it. I don't believe I chose it. I love it. I've come to love it. But I don't believe I chose it. I believe I was chosen to do it. I didn't have a choice in that sense. I didn't have a choice. I've heard actors say, don't be an actor if you can be anything else, because it's hard to be an actor. And I'd say, don't be a preacher if God will let you be anything else. It's a hard way in many, many ways. Okay? Well, Paul feels this is an obligation laid on him that he gets to take no credit, if you would, for what he's doing. If I do this of my own will, I have some reward. But if not of my own will, I am entrusted with a commission. Commissioning means to be sent. It's a similar word to apostello, though it doesn't look like it at all. One who's sent out. What then is my reward? Just this, that in my proclamation I may make the good news free of charge, so as not to make full use of my rights in the gospel. For though I am free with respect to all, I've made myself a slave to all, so that I might win more of them. And when he says he's free, he means I am a Roman, born in a Roman city. I have all the rights of citizenship. Growing up as a Jew, he feels he is a person set free by the love of God. And yet, I have made myself a doulos. It means slave or servant to all, so that I might win more of them. And then he says, to the Jews I became as a Jew in order to win Jews. To those under Torah, I became as one under Torah, though I myself am not under Torah, so that I might win those under Torah. To those outside Torah, I became as one outside Torah, though I'm not free from God's Torah, but am under Christ's Torah. Remember, Jesus said, all of the teachings in Torah and the prophets can be summed up in these two statements. The Shema from Deuteronomy Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, He is one. You must have no other God but Him. You must love this one with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second is from Leviticus, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. All the Torah, all the prophets in these two. And Paul says that's the Torah of Christ. I am under that, so that I might win those outside Torah, that is, Gentiles. To the weak I became weak, so that I might win the weak. I've become all things to all people, that I might by all means save some. I do it all for the sake of the good news, so that I may share in its blessings. Do you not know that in a race the runners all compete, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may win it. Athletes exercise self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable one. So I do not run aimlessly, nor do I box as though flailing the air, beating the air, but I punish my body and enslave it, so that after proclaiming to others, I myself should not be disqualified. And later he will say, I have run the race. I have fought the good fight. Another place he says, I keep straining for the tape. At the end of the race, I keep straining for the tape at the end. What Paul's saying here is what you see on some T-shirts. Go hard or go home. I mean, if we're into this Christian faith, then it deserves all we got. From all of us. If you want to win the prize, you have to work, work, work. I saw an interview just recently about the Olympics, and these two guys were talking about Michael Phelps. If you followed Michael's career at all, of course you know he won 8 gold medals in Beijing for swimming, more than any other in history. The record had been 7 by one individual down in Mexico City, and in Munich, Mark had won a lot. But a year ago, Lochte was beating Phelps fairly regularly. And in the big trials they had a few weeks ago, Lochte won one event by millisecond. Milli fractions of a second. And then Phelps the next night, and then Lochte, and then Phelps. And these two said, don't count Michael out. Don't count Michael Phelps out. He just doesn't believe he will lose. And he's been working really hard the last year. I saw him interviewed, and he said, after I won 8 gold medals in Beijing, I let myself go. I just couldn't make myself go to the pool for a while. But then he got back, and he started working and working and working. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how they do. Both of them very capable, and both of them outstanding athletes, and both of them representing our country. I'll be rooting for both of them. But Paul is saying, don't go unless you're going all out. Don't get into this Christian faith. And see, this follows after how much of a price are you willing to pay not to be a stumbling block to somebody else, not to leave a wrong impression in somebody's mind, even if they've come to an erroneous conclusion. We're supposed to be beyond suspicion, if as it were, about the way we do things. All these years that Gail and I have been married, I was taught when I was little to be really careful with the way you deal with money. Very, very careful. Always count very carefully. Be sure somebody else counts very carefully. Just be beyond reproach. And you know, if Gail and I have exchanged money about anything at all, this is her spending money and she borrowed from me or whatever, or I said, Gail, you got a couple of dollars, I intend to give that back to her. And so I write myself a little note so I'm sure I don't forget. And that $2 wouldn't be a big deal to her, but it is to me at that point. I put a little note in my pocket, and the first time I can get change, I get that $2. And I talk to her about, you have these little paper trails, so there can be no doubt, that even the least little bit of suspicion, he'll take my money and he'll forget what he said. He'll use my money and he'll forget what he said. No, he won't. No, he won't. To be just beyond reproach, best you can, even with those you love best and those who trust you the most. To be really, really careful that there's no suspicion here whatsoever. So Paul talks about, if you're in it, be in it to win the prize. And he understands the prize is a gift of God. It certainly is a gift of God. But God wants to gift you. He wants to do for you, bring all of you. And Jesus said it slightly different ways, but if your eye with which you aim is causing you to not hit the target, plug it out. It's better for you to go blind into eternity than to go the wrong direction, and so on. So an over-dramatic way perhaps of saying it, but the same Paul does. Don't get in if you're not serious. Chapter 10. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were all under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. Now stop and think. We were all under the cloud. Now to you and me, when we think about being under a cloud, we think of some sadness maybe, or some difficulty. That isn't what he's talking about. He's talking about that trek out of Egypt. Okay? So, go back now. These young Gentile Christians may not understand, but any who are coming out of Judaism or consider themselves still in Judaism, they'll understand immediately that when God sent Moses back to Egypt and told him that he finally was ready to deliver his people after 400 years of slavery, I'm ready. I've had enough of this. My people are going to go free. Well, no, you're wrong, God. Pharaoh has all these charioteers and all these bowmen and spearmen. No, they aren't. Yeah, they are, God said. I'm going to hammer Pharaoh over and over and over till he lets my people go. I just want you to go lead them. I'm going to make this happen. You go lead them out of there when Pharaoh finally says, get out. And so there were 10 plagues, as you recall, and after the 5th and 6th and 7th, when Pharaoh almost but no, so he got hammered 10 times, and finally he let them go. Now these are people who have been enslaved in one little small part of ancient Egypt for 400 years. How they're going to know where they need to go? And God said, I'll put a cloud in front of you by day. If you've ever been in the Middle East, there aren't many clouds. There aren't many clouds. So a cloud would stand out. I want you to follow it every day. When the sun goes down and it gets dark, there'll be a pillar of fire. A volcano or something, When you're in the Mediterranean, you can often see Mount Etna on Sicily, with the smoke or fire coming out of the top of it. We don't know. Cloud in the daytime, ball of fire, pillar of fire at night. That's the way I'm going to lead you. So Paul at this point is talking about that period in Moses' lifetime and the Israelites' lifetime when they were under the cloud that was leading them. Okay. Now, he's already told Gentiles, Paul's been telling them, that they are children of Abraham. Not by DNA. if he could use that language in those days, not by DNA. They didn't have Jewish blood. But that Abraham and Sarah were counted right with God because they trusted God. Trusted that God did, in fact, love them, wanted them to have a future, was going to give them a child, was going to use that child as the pivot of a new nation. If you too trust God, Paul is saying, you are children of Abraham and Sarah. Not genetically, but faithfully, you're children of Abraham and Sarah. So now he's going to use that time passing through the sea, when the waters parted and then came crashing in on the advancing Egyptians, as a symbol of baptism. Because the Jews had ceremonial bathing, the mikvah baths, but for Christians, baptism became replacement for circumcision as a religious ceremony. Circumcision is not a religious ceremony for us Christians. Baptism is we call it our rite, R-I-T-E, our rite of initiation. Every time I baptize a baby, the waters of baptisms are the way we enter into the family of faith. This morning we're acknowledging this little girl, this little boy is our little sister, our little brother, and all of us are going to provide a community of love and forgiveness. Those are the words we use. And baptism symbols that entrance. Okay, so as he has told them they're children of Abraham and Sarah, if they have faith like Abraham and Sarah, now he's telling them that even as the children of Israel were baptized by the collapsing waters, they are being baptized too. Okay. All ate the same spiritual food, the manna that came from heaven, and all drank the same spiritual drink, not only water from the rock, but if you would, God's Spirit and presence with them. For they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. Now notice here, he's saying it followed. It came after Moses and Aaron and Miriam and all these priests and Levites through all these years. But the rock that Moses was told to strike and water would come pouring forth, and it did. He did, and it did. Now he's talking about a new rock, if you would. Because you see, Jesus came to be known in the early church as the cornerstone of these Gentiles' faith. The stone rejected by the builder has become the cornerstone. So he's mixing his metaphors again, Virginia. He's sort of mixing his metaphors here, but the rock that comes after is Christ our Lord. That's what he's saying here. The rock that followed them was Messiah, Christos, Messiah. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them, and they were struck down in the wilderness. Snakes came, they had all kinds of problems, and God was not pleased because they didn't keep faith, and some of them took gold and made their own little calf and went right back to pagan heathen worship, you remember. Now, these things occurred as examples for us so that we might not desire evil as they did. Do not become idolaters. And that simply means don't set up anything as having value the way your God has value. Do not assign worth to anything that should be in the place of the worth of God. God is the only one worthy of your worship. Do not become idolaters as some of them did. And here he has in mind, of course, that golden calf. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink, and they rose up to play. And this word for play is fool around. They weren't playing hips, ring around the rosy. They were fooling around. And he means sex. So promiscuous sex as well. We must not indulge in sexual immorality, as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in a single day, we must not put Christ to the test, as some of them did, and were destroyed by serpents. You remember the snakes that came. We're told in the Torah that Moses didn't get to cross the River Jordan into the Promised Land because there was a time when he didn't trust God. When God said, Moses was whining and complaining because the people were whining and complaining. We have no food, we have no water, you brought us out here to die. They've been slaves 400 years, anything should be better than that. No, already they're saying, we had it so much better in Egypt. And God said, there's water right over there. Strike that rock with your staff and water will gush out. And Moses said, really? Really? And the Torah says, in anger, Moses went, what? And God said, don't ever do that to me again. Don't ever do that to me again. Don't ever doubt that what I've told you will come true. Don't ever doubt that I care for you and my people Israel. I believe I'm the one who was there at the burning bush. I believe I'm the one who gave you the name. I believe I'm the one who hammered Pharaoh 10 times. Don't ever do that to me again. And the writers of Torah said, Moses didn't trust God at that point, and God didn't let him cross the river. He was his man. God still loved Moses, still was able to work through him, but there was a failing there. And God didn't forget. If you remember when Rabbi Zimmerman was here just a couple of years ago, and he announced that his last night he was going to talk about that particular chapter in Exodus, and I knew that was the chapter where Moses finally comes down with the Ten Commandments, and he finds this golden calf that Aaron has made. And I just knew Zimmerman was going to, lambaste Aaron and all the children of Israel, and the whole sermon was about Moses. If you were here, you heard him say, Moses came down and saw what they had done and was so mad, he flung those tablets down and broke them to smithereens. And God said, that's not what I told you to do. So I want you to prepare 2 new tablets. The indication is that God had prepared the first ones. I want you to prepare 2 new tablets and carry them up that hill where you and I have just come from. And I'll deal with you when we get to the top of the hill. And Zimmerman's whole sermon was about Moses, that Moses had some work to do. God was going to forgive him, but instead of God focusing at that moment, now God was not happy about the golden calf, and he was ready to disown them all, but Moses was his chief man here, and Moses was failing, and God had to deal with Moses' failure at that point, his anger. And it worked. Moses then begged God, please, don't destroy them. These are your people. Oh, yeah, that's right. They are. Remember? Okay, but Moses had work to do. Chisel out some new stones here and carry them to the top of that mountain, and we'll start all over. But you've got some work to do here. Okay? We must not put Christ to the test, as some of them did. Do not complain, as some of them did and were destroyed by the destroyer. These things happened to them to serve as his example. They were written down to instruct us. Remember what Torah means? The instructions. The instructions, the teachings. So these teachings are for us to remind us, on whom the ends of the ages have come. So if you think you are standing, watch out that you do not fall. No testing has overtaken you that is not common to everyone. God is faithful. He will not let you be tested beyond your strength, but with the testing He will also provide the way out so that you may be able to endure. And I told you the word for to be able is the word for power in the noun form. You will have power. You can do this. You can do this with God's help. So here Paul is sort of exhausted. All these complaints coming out of Corinth. All this squabbling. Can you imagine how sick at heart he must be? Just sick at heart. And he writes this letter to them. Don't do what my people did in the desert. Well, they had been freed from slavery. And within days, all they can think about is how much better it was in Egypt. Okay? Well, if you haven't been to church yet, don't rush off. We're going to sing 9 more of your favorite hymns, and Kathy Venable is going to sing for us. Our own Kathy Venable. It's going to be really, really special. I'll be right back.